I think the most important thing is to do something that you are really interested in, because if you're starting it, a lot of things will depend on you. And the key also to MLT is consistency. So we consistently just keep doing stuff that we think is exciting and interesting.
You're listening to Gradient Descent, a show where we learn about making machine learning models work in the real world. I'm your host, Lucas Bewald.
Suzana Ilić is a founder of MLT, Machine Learning Tokyo, which is a huge community of people working on and learning about deep learning. She's hosted around 100 machine learning related events in the last 2.5 years and built an incredible community. I'm super excited to talk to her. Suzana, it's so nice to talk to you. I was really looking forward to this because I see it that we share at least two interests in common. One seems like the democratization of AI, and another is edge computing or deploying deep learning to hardware. So I'm super excited to hear about what you've been up to. And I thought maybe we'd start with Machine Learning Tokyo. I would love to hear about kind of why you started it and what it does.
Yeah, first of all, thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited. I love weights and biases, and I visited in SF, so I'm super excited to be on this podcast. So thanks for having me. MLT is a Japan-based nonprofit organization in Ippansha and Hojin, and our kind of core mission is to democratize machine learning. So we want to make machine learning and deep learning as accessible as possible to as many people as possible, because we believe that machine learning is going to be everywhere. It's going to be some standard component in the software stack in the very near future. So I think a lot of people should know what it is and be able to navigate. And we mainly do this through open education, through open source. So we build a lot of open source projects and open science. So we work with universities. And we're here in Tokyo, and we support a research and engineering community of about, I think, 4,500 members.
Well, 4,500. And so how does it work? Like, how do people join the community and what do they do?
So it depends. There's many ways how to join the community. You can, just be an attendee of the meetups or join our workshops or hands-on sessions. And then you can just join Meetup and you get all the information you need there on upcoming sessions. But there's also more active ways to join MLT. So if you want to contribute, if you want to work on open source, or if you want to, for example, hold a workshop or lead a study session, you can join Slack and you can talk to me. And there's many ways how to be more actively involved in the community.
What inspired you to start MLT?
So we started, I think, 2.5 years ago, and it was basically just out of our own needs. We were 2 people. That's how MLT started. And so I'm a domain expert in machine learning. So I come from a very traditional academic background. I'm a trained linguist, and I was always working with text analysis and NLP. I was using very simple methods. And at some point during my master's, I was working on sentiment and emotion and effect. I realized that these kind of very simple statistical methods give us some intuition and some insight about a corpus, about a data set. But language is full of very complex and very beautiful things, like metaphors and humor and analogies and irony and sarcasm. And, that's not possible to grasp with those very simple tools. So I think 3 or 4 years ago, I started reading about machine learning and deep learning and neural networks, and I got super hooked. And I realized, okay, having algorithms that learn from data directly instead of from rules or lexicons might be a way to understand language better, or to be able to process language better. So I started writing my first machine learning code 3 years ago, but I also realized, coming from a different background, it's pretty challenging. It's pretty difficult. And for me back then, I knew, okay, I want to have this collaborative learning environment. I need to be surrounded by people with different backgrounds, people that have different skills and know different things than I do. And together, or at least that was what I thought, we could learn faster. And that's exactly what happened. So Yuvraj, my co-founder, is also coming from a different background, from an electrical engineering hardware background, and he wanted to use machine learning, and he still wants to use it for edge devices, microcontrollers. And we started very small, and we just met every week and wrote machine learning code. And every week, more and more people joined, even though it was kind of word of mouth. And after like a few weeks, there were so many people, we didn't know where to put them anymore. So we met in this open co-working space at Yahoo, and with too many people. So everybody wanted to write machine learning code. And then we started like putting out our first meetups, and ever since it has been growing pretty fast. So it started from very small, but kind of, out of our own need to, because in Tokyo, there was no such thing back then. Like 2.5 years ago, there were a lot of communities, like great communities, but there was no like place to actually build AI. There was no place to work on hands-on stuff. So that's how it all started.
That's so cool. So you built the community that you wanted to be a part of. That's so great.
Yeah.
How did you frame it? Like when you were first saying, "Hey, come join me." What was the thing to do? Like it was like, let's learn ML together, or read papers, or how did you think about that?
So the very first kind of, I think first 6 months or so, it was purely dedicated to going through tutorials. So really learning about how to write machine learning code and learning about, getting a conceptual understanding of different algorithms, of the math, but mainly to write code. And that was how we started, is just, going through as much stuff as possible. And then once we kind of, the team grew bigger, and more people have joined us. So after 6 months, it kind of slowly started to broaden. So we did a lot more things. We started doing hands-on deep learning workshops in the first year. So we had deep learning engineers who were working full-time at Japanese companies, and they were giving 5-hour deep learning workshops where we focus on writing live code from scratch and training a specific model, training, I don't know, we first focused a lot on computer vision. So we went through a lot of computer vision stuff, and then gradually kind of moved into different areas of machine learning. And like as the community kind of progresses and grows, we see that we go into different directions. So now we have like a computer vision team that does CNN architectures and their own little ecosystem. We have a team that is fully dedicated to edge AI, so running deep learning algorithms on hardware, on microcontrollers and edge devices. We have an NLP team that does research and natural language processing. So, and everything is fully community driven. So there is no full-time employees or anything. It's really how the community evolves and grows, and that kind of broadens into different directions.
That's so impressive. So, like, how do you run a good workshop? Like a 5-hour workshop. I've seen really good ones and bad ones. Like, how would you do it to make sure that it's a good experience for people?
I think it was learning by doing. And in the beginning, we really didn't know what we were doing. So I think 2 years ago, when we held our first deep learning workshops, a lot of things were pretty difficult and pretty challenging because people come with different machines, with different skill sets, with different background knowledge, with different software and hardware. So it was pretty difficult. But we kind of slowly, we got a lot of feedback in the kind of first iterations and worked with that feedback. So things that made it easier for us is just, focus on one thing that is really interesting to us, where we see value, that can bring value to us as instructors, as deep learning engineers, as well as to the community. So something that is very useful. The second thing is like make sure that technically everything runs smoothly. So we switched, I think, after our second or third workshop to Google Colab. That makes it very easy, like to just write code, and there is no like prerequisite except for having a Gmail account. But that solves a lot of the technical issues and problems that we had.
Yeah. But does everybody like build the same thing together? Is that how you run it? So everyone, it's like you sort of like say a problem, everybody works together. Like how I guess like how much do you kind of coordinate like everybody doing the exact same thing versus let people going off on their own?
So it depends what kind of workshop we're doing. So if we have our standard deep learning workshop, there's typically a topic, and we already have prepared like a repository with the model that we're going to build. We sit down with 50 people. We do some theory. So we do first like maybe an hour of conceptual understanding of what is going to happen, what we're going to build. And then Dimitris, for example, he's live coding from scratch. So he basically walks you through from the very beginning to getting your performance metrics. And so these kind of workshops are designed to do exactly this, only this. And people just follow along with the code, and they can live code from scratch. And this is something that people find really useful, because especially like kind of the live coding aspect, because sometimes when you're on your own, you look at, blocks of code, and you kind of try to figure out what is happening, try to figure out your own thing. But it's useful if someone actually writes code with you and explains what is happening. You'll learn just faster probably, or this is at least what I find to be useful. On the other hand, we have much more open sessions. So especially like our hardware sessions where I do Edge AI, the only thing we provide is a ton of hardware. These are typically smaller groups, maybe 20, 25 people. And then people come in, they build teams, they choose their hardware, and they come up with their own idea, and they build their own stuff. And then at the end of the day, each team presents what they have been working on. So it really kind of depends on the session, I guess.
Is there like a different kind of culture in Japan than say in San Francisco? Like, are language barriers like an issue at all? Like what's it like to be sort of, I guess I know what it's like to be in San Francisco, but what do you think that there's big differences coming from Japan?
So I don't know San Francisco that well. So I've been just a few times, and I went to a lot of meetups actually, and they're pretty cool. I think a lot more things are just happening in San Francisco, and I think a lot more things are supported probably in SF. In Japan, language is definitely an issue. It's a huge barrier. It is something that I've been constantly thinking about. In Japan, there are amazing communities in machine learning. There are two super big machine learning communities, the TensorFlow user group, that is very related, of course, like to Google, and then Deep Lab, which is, I think, affiliated with Microsoft. So those guys are very big, and they're very, very Japanese. So everything is in Japanese. And then there's us. I think we're like similar in size. We're English speaking. And yeah, this is like one thing that has been bothering me so much, because I'm always trying to find ways how to, not have these isolated communities. So this is a challenge in Japan. This is definitely a challenge, and we're working on it. But other than that, you see that communities are growing, and that there is a huge demand also for machine learning talent. So apart from the kind of very Japan-specific problems like language barriers, I think it's a pretty good and active environment to be in.
Yeah, I remember I went to Japan last year, and I've worked off and on with Japan as a market, and I've always been impressed by how excited people are about machine learning, even going back like 10, 15 years. It seemed like there's a lot of enthusiasm for it. And actually, I've been kind of wrestling. I just would like to find a way to translate our documentation into Japanese and kind of keep it up to date.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about that lately.
Yeah, I think that would be a good move. We were also like only focusing on English, but there needs to be like this bridge, and we need to start somewhere. So we also started translating. We worked with a TA from Stanford to translate their CS deep learning course material or course notes into Japanese to make it more accessible to people. Wow. And have like bilingual kind of resources for people. So we're trying also very hard kind of to include as many people as possible.
That's awesome.
Hi, we'd love to take a moment to tell you guys about Weights and Biases. Weights and Biases is a tool that helps you track and visualize every detail of your machine learning models. We help you debug your machine learning models in real time, collaborate easily, and advance the state of the art in machine learning. You can integrate weights and biases into your models with just a few lines of code. With hyperparameter sweeps, you can find the best set of hyperparameters for your models automatically. You can also track and compare how many GPU resources your models are using. With one line of code, you can visualize model predictions in form of images, videos, audio, plotly charts, molecular data, segmentation maps, and 3D point clouds. You can save everything you need to reproduce your models days, weeks, or even months after training. Finally, with reports, you can make your models come alive. Reports are like blog posts in which your readers can interact with your model metrics and predictions. Reports serve as a centralized repository of metrics, predictions, hyperparameters tried, and accompanying nodes. All of this together gives you a bird's eye view of your machine learning workflow. You can use reports to share your model insights, keep your team on the same page, and collaborate effectively remotely. I'll leave a link in the show notes below to help you get started. And now, let's get back to the episode.
I mean, when you think about sort of democratization of AI, what else do you think is important? Like, how do you think about that?
Maybe this is because of my personal background, because I am a domain expert, but I also see like how important machine learning is and is going to be in the future, in the near future. If possible, we should have as many people as possible involved in even technical stuff. So there have been like a lot of democratization efforts. If you look at H2O, for example, with AutoML, like making it really very easy to experiment, but also other, of course, like AutoML platforms from tech giants. For us, it's like a lot of education that we do. We work with a lot of universities. So something that I kind of personally like doing is working with research scientists or students coming from different backgrounds. So I think machine learning could be super useful for people that work with a lot of data. And we worked with a lot of super interesting people. For example, last year in summer, I think we were at the Tokyo Institute of Technology, where we held a 2-day boot camp for ELSI. ELSI is the Earth Life Sciences Institute, and those guys are amazing. They're astrophysicists, the planetary sciences, computational biologists, chemists, like, mind-blowing stuff. And we had a room full of people, and they all work with different kinds of data sets and problem sets, and with different tools and techniques. And machine learning could be one way for them like to get new insights and maybe even to advance science. So these kind of things are, I think, for me personally, super exciting. Getting like more domain experts involved into technical stuff, doing open education, doing open science. This has been, pretty interesting.
What about people without kind of like a math or programming background? Do you think there's like room for them to contribute too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. There are Jeremy Howard and Rachel. They've been doing like the best job ever into getting domain experts on board, right? You do have to have some coding background, so you should be able to write some Python code. But going through Fast AI courses, for example, it's a more top-down approach, and they're exactly democratizing machine learning or making it uncool by having so much more people just involved. And this top-down approach allows you to get into deep learning without having to have a PhD at Stanford in computer science or like a really strong math background. You build stuff. So you start with thinking about your problem and your data and to build stuff. And then afterwards, you start digging deeper into the math, for example, that you might need for your particular project or problem. And I think I really like this kind of approach. That's very similar to what we've been doing with MLT as well. Even though we also do a lot of like fundamental work, so we also have like study sessions for machine learning, math, and other things. But I think there's definitely room for people who are coming from different backgrounds, and I think if they find it even potentially useful, they should look into it.
I mean, you've probably seen people go from kind of novices to knowing a lot about ML, and people ask me all the time, kind of, how do I get into this stuff? Do you like have any advice from the data that you're seeing on, what folks should do if you have no background and you really want to go deep on this stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So I think two things are super important. The first thing is like, don't neglect your background. Don't think that you have to start over from zero and you don't know anything before that. Leverage your background, leverage your experience, your professional experience, your academic background, whatever it is that you have been working on in the past years, leverage that. It's the same. There are many examples for that. For example, you could be a hardware engineer and you know a lot about hardware. And now you're getting into machine learning and deep learning. Now leverage that background and that expertise and learn about machine learning and how to combine these two things. In my case, it's language. So I've studied language as a system for many, many years, and I use machine learning and the combination of language and machine learning to kind of bring maybe interesting and unique insights to the particular project that I'm working on. I talked to a recruiter here in Japan, and I asked him, so what does the market need? And he said, well, it's here in Japan, it's not enough just to know deep learning. You have to have some sort of specialization. You have to have some sort of domain expertise, some like way how you can use this kind of deep learning in combination with something else. It could be software engineering, it could be hardware, it could be language, it could be anything. So this is the one thing. And the second thing is when you're coming from a different background and you want to go into machine learning, there's of course like two approaches. Either you start with the fundamentals, you start with math, or you do what I just earlier mentioned, top down. You start with a project and you just write code, build that project, and then figure out details later. And I think the most important thing here is to figure out what is interesting to you. What would be something that really kind of catches your attention and you love working on, and make that decision and then start working on that. Because the problem here is that there are too many options. You could do too many things. Everything seems to be interesting, but if you spend a little time here, a little time there, you will get maybe, some shallow understanding of a few things, but you'll not advance as quickly as you might want. So figure out what you want to do and leverage your background is probably my advice.
Do you have do you think that you see people being more successful kind of starting from the fundamentals or starting with a project? Because you mentioned those are sort of two different approaches, and different people gravitate towards one or the other. Do you have a preference, or can both work?
Both can definitely work. I think we were just like only talking about domain experts and people coming from different backgrounds. But of course, I think what the research, what academia and industry needs just as much or even more is people with very, very strong CS backgrounds, with very strong math backgrounds that know how to optimize and know how to work on theoretical things. So I'm not saying like this is not important, not at all. I think, of course, this is still the norm, and this is what probably employers want to see the most. And if you're coming from a strong CS or math background, I think you already have a strong foundation to go very deep into machine learning and deep learning. But I just want to say like there's room for other people as well.
Okay, so this is a little bit outside of the scope maybe of a ML podcast, but I'm just fascinated by this. So, or maybe it is. Well, what about the starting a community? Like, do you have advice on someone in an area like you where they want to find like-minded people? I mean, do you have any advice on that? Like, if I'm in a city where there isn't already like an ML group, how would you go about finding people?
Yeah, and like so many people write me messages on that. They're in some
really?
yeah.
That's so great.
They're either in remote areas or in cities where like literally something like a machine learning community still doesn't exist. And I would really suggest, I would always say like go for it. If there is no such thing out there, be the first one to do it, because MLT has like evolved into an amazing community. Like I'm amazed by how active and how engaged the community is. And all those guys, they have full-time jobs, but they still find kind of time to work on open source and to teach other people and to do these kind of workshops. So it's pretty amazing. So I would really kind of suggest to think about starting a community wherever you are.
Do you have any practical tips for getting it off the ground? Because it seems kind of daunting to me to try to start that and keep people engaged. How do you get people to keep talking?
I think the most important thing is to do something that you are really interested in, because if you're starting it, a lot of things will depend on you. And the key is, I think somebody wrote it on Twitter recently, the key also to MLT is consistency. So we consistently just keep doing stuff that we think is exciting and interesting. So start from what you're interested in, start from your own problem set or from your own need, and more people will follow. And then like more practical things, there's always the thing, we started doing remote meetups, so that is not the kind of burden of having to find a venue and a sponsor and other things. So this is an option how to kick things off, to find more people who are interested. That makes it very easy. Like there's no easier way probably than to start like remote meetups. On the other hand, if you want to start something in your city, you might want to check out, like, first of all, like form a small peer group around yourself and kind of try to figure out what you want to do, and then start to look for a physical place and figure out if you want to do hands-on stuff, if you want to do like more educational stuff, learn together and get it out there, like try to reach as many people as possible. And I think, I just yesterday I talked to someone, a journalist, and he said to me, wow, there's no such thing for writers out there. I want to start something for writers out there. And I think it's kind of the same thing, right? There's a need for all these niche groups and communities. So I think if you get it out there and if you do things that you're very passionate about, people will follow.
Do you have any thoughts on like diversity and inclusion in ML and in these groups that you create? Is that something that is top of mind for you?
Yeah, that's something that is very important to us. Luckily, within MLT, we're very diverse, kind of 4,500 people in terms of, countries and languages and skill sets and backgrounds and professional experiences. So this is really super diverse. But women are super underrepresented. I think 2 years ago when we started on working on deep learning workshops, we had 60 engineers and I was the only woman. So
Wow.
I realized, okay, yeah, so we really needed to do something about that. So we're doing like very specific, not only events, but also projects that support diversity and inclusion. We do a lot of women in machine learning events that are supported by Google Japan, Mercury, and other companies. We also do projects that I just earlier mentioned, where one of them was, we had about 12 bilingual engineers that worked on translating some of the Stanford course notes into Japanese and having this kind of bilingual resources for people, just to be more inclusive in general, also to the Japanese community, because we are literally in Japan and we are very diverse, but it still kind of seems like there's a disconnect between a Japanese community and an English-speaking community. And I think it has never been more important. We all know, like, tech in general is multidisciplinary. Machine learning should be as well multidisciplinary. We need people with different skills, with different expertises. We need people with different backgrounds in general. So this is something we all have to work on, I think.
Do you have any other suggestions for making a community feel more inclusive?
So in our core team, we decided very early on that we want to create an environment that is very collaborative and that is very inclusive. That means that we really want to don't have this as kind of this elite math, machine learning group. We want to include as many people as possible. And we want to have like decision processes. We want to have the community involved in like what directions we take, what kind of things we're tackling on next. And we do, like, every project that we do in every workshop and every study session, we kind of have that sort of mindset. So when you look at our math sessions, so last year we started doing remote math reading sessions. So we're going through a book that walks you through some machine learning math. And so more than 1,000 people signed up from all over the world. So
Wow.
we have sessions in the Bay Area, we have sessions in India, in APAC, here in Japan. And the thing is, it is very inclusive because the people that join those sessions, their levels of math are very different. So we have complete beginners, we have people that are coming from completely different backgrounds. But in our Tokyo sessions, we also have mathematicians, we have experts, we have PhDs in math, people that have taught math for many years. And it's pretty amazing. Like, it's a very interactive, after the reading, it's a very interactive discussion where people ask all sorts of questions, and together we kind of brainstorm around things and try to, our experts like Emil and Jason, they try to explain mathematical concepts, and it's been pretty amazing. So I think really having this mindset, whatever you do, that you need this. It's not like it's something that is actually enriching whatever you do, is something that is very important. And having that mindset is probably going to help a lot.
That's super cool. That sounds really fun.
It is.
I'd love to
It's
attend.
been pretty fun. Yeah, it's been pretty good.
What is something underrated maybe in machine learning that you think people don't pay enough attention to?
I think something still underrated in machine learning is data.
Still? Oh my God.
Yeah, I think so. Like, it doesn't matter who I talk to. It's like always, I feel like there's this kind of, it's a troublesome thing to do, right? You don't want to work with data. You want to, write machine learning algorithms. You want to train models. You want to get good accuracy and push accuracy or metric. It's not about data. So data is kind of the least that people think about sometimes, or this is at least kind of my understanding of it. And I think we should definitely think more about data and put more emphasis on data. Maybe this is also because of my own background, because I've been working with data pretty much all my career, and just 3 years ago started working with machine learning algorithms. But yeah, it all starts with data, and it all probably ends with data. I think Chip Hewen just mentioned recently, who owns the data pipeline will own the machine learning in production, or the machine learning system, I guess. I don't know if it's still that case. Maybe in SF, maybe in the Bay Area, people think more about data. I don't know.
I don't know. I think my background is similar to yours, and so I feel like data is so unbelievably important. I guess
Right.
it's
Yeah.
not possible for it to be properly rated for its contribution to ML. Cool. And then when you think about like kind of making machine learning work in the real world for like real applications,
Mhm.
what's like the hardest part about getting it to work?
So in our case, we love to experiment with new things. And I think, it's difficult. When you're trying new things, you kind of need to figure out a lot of stuff. And generally, I think in production environments, there's a lot of experimenting and try to see what works. So making a production pipeline work and deploying machine learning for different use cases has different challenges, from data all the way to software engineering to monitoring your model, like how it changes in different real world scenarios. So I think we need to, even though like things are taking off, there's still like a lot of room like to work on these kind of things, infrastructure things, deployment things, finding new use cases, that make a lot of sense for machine learning. At the same time, I think this is super exciting. So this is something that really kind of excites me probably the most, is thinking about use cases and trying, experimenting a lot and trying new things. We don't work like at MLT. We're not working on. We do work on production things as well, but it's not our main thing. Our main thing is just trying out new things, experimenting, and make POCs. So we don't actually deploy a lot of things on large scale to production. So maybe I can't talk about like the main challenges here, but what I can say is that we try, like if we take Edge, for example, we're trying out a lot of things. We're working with different hardware. We're trying to think about different use cases where these things can be deployed. And like a lot of things, just don't work out and fail, but that's totally fine. That's good as well. This is something that we kind of also need to grow and to figure out things. But then at the same time, we also build things that work and that are super interesting. So yeah, it's a lot of experimenting, I guess. Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, so my final question,
Yeah.
if I am listening to you talk and I get excited about joining one of your virtual events or something, how do I find out more and how do I get more involved with MLT? Can I do that remotely?
Yes, you can, definitely. So we do, as I mentioned earlier, like on Meetup, you can find all of our events, and a lot of them are actually remote. So if you want like to be part of an event or a meetup or something like that, you can just join Meetup, and we'll post everything there. There's also more active things. So if you would like to work on open source or doing some other things, or get more involved in general, you can join our Slack group. There's pretty much the whole community there talking about different things. So in more technical depth, so you can also find people there to work on projects and do other things. And so these are kind of the main two things. Meetup for events, and maybe Slack for projects and other stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was great to talk with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.